Okie doke. Welcome aboard, everyone. Fantastic to have you all here today. I'm feeling very proud that I think we've gotten the highest attendance that we've had, highest registration, and I think attendance today. So thank you to all of the people that are online, and also to all of the people who'll be watching this later on as a video as well. That's something that we do with the webinars, is we make sure that we're recording as we go. In fact, the wonderful Chris Ennebrad, who's my business manager, is sort of back of house at a webinar, and she's recording for us. And she also can give you a hand too if you're having any tech issues while we get started here. I'm noticing some new names on there today. So if you're having any tech issues there today and you'd like to get a bit of help, make sure that in the question box you let her know, and Chris is pretty good at being able to troubleshoot that stuff. So look, today I guess having a number of people, more people involved today than previously lets me know that this topic of how you create a powerful learning experience is something that has piqued people's interest. And I guess even in preparing for this webinar today, I went looking for this banner here that we use to both promote and to intro our webinars. I went looking for a photo that I thought would best send a message about what we're really trying to achieve in this webinar today. And I went for this one, even though I know that it's a bit of a stock photo and it's probably contrived and it's probably not a real training experience. I went for it because of the affect that you can see on the people's faces in the photo. And to be honest, that's what we're looking for in terms of creating a powerful experience, is to think a lot more about the affect and a lot more about the product. They're probably the two big messages that I want you to take out of today, is to think a lot more about the affect and the product than you might think about the feedback and the delivery. So feedback, I think, is a fraught way to go about assessing or evaluating the power of a learning experience. Because I mean, for a start, what we know about feedback after you run a workshop or you deliver some training is that the two most common things that people are thinking about at the end of a workshop is, one, what's the temperature of the room, and two, what was the food like in the breaks. So people are very influenced by some external factors, but the one thing that we can control, I guess, and we often can't have too much control over the temperature, although I do recommend you don't make the room too warm. Heat tends to be one of those things that sends us off to la la land and puts us to sleep. And I guess secondly, if you do think you can control the food in the environment, is make sure that it's as carbless as possible, so that we don't send people into that feeling of after Christmas lunch where you feel like you must take a nap. So if you can control those things, fantastic. But the quality of our training is what allows us to control the affect that people experience, and that affect is either increasing or it's diminishing the power of the learning that your participants are experiencing. What I mean by that is that if people experience negative affect, so if they experience boredom, if they experience humiliation, and people often do in a training experience humiliation. And what I mean by that is that you randomly ask a question to someone who was not expecting it, and in that moment they're asked to recall something that they weren't particularly prepared for. It's not deeply embedded in their neocortex. They haven't got the language ready. They kind of feel like they get it wrong. They wish you'd ask that question again 5 minutes later when they've fully prepared their answer mentally, and they experience some embarrassment, some shame, some humiliation as a result of that. And that sticks with them so long and so powerfully that they find it very difficult to pay attention after that. In fact, some of the research around shame and humiliation, particularly the way that it impacts our ability to absorb academic content, is that we experience that feeling even more acutely than we experience some other incredibly negative experiences. Things like pain, things like fear, and things like guilt, and even things like grief are felt far less acutely than the shame and embarrassment of looking inadequate in front of others. So we want to be really, really careful about making sure that people don't experience too much negative affect in the learning environment. On the other side of it, when people experience positive affect, they tend to pay more attention and they tend to absorb more than they would otherwise. The research on how much content people can absorb in a learning environment is pretty much that, you know, it's about the research is that in any 90-minute presentation, people will commit to long-term memory about 7 seconds, which means that in the short term, they've got a fair bit in there, but by the time they've slept a couple of times, they've transferred only 7 seconds of that presentation to long-term memory, and they will convert an even smaller percentage of that into a change in behaviour or the way that they're practicing, which I guess in some ways for a 1-hour webinar doesn't leave me a lot to work with. But if we can, in the learning experience, allow people to feel really fantastic feelings, which isn't just that they're excited and isn't just that they feel happy. In fact, they're the feelings that the positive feelings that we don't feel incredibly acutely. The ones that we do feel incredibly acutely are things like curiosity, interest, and engagement. And they're the kinds of feelings that we want people to experience, which means we have to encourage people to think and not just receive. So that's why I say to you that we really need to focus very hard on not just the feedback that we're getting after a learning experience about how well we delivered, but we need to actually, you know, think more about what our people are thinking, because it's that changes behaviour. So let's get cracking. I just prime here, I guess the people that came last month might be familiar with this slide here. And the reason I'm showing it again is that I think that it's important to actually just remember the premise, I guess, that we're beginning from here. And this is some really important information that came out of the Association for Talent Development. What they researched was, what is it that engages people? And I said that affect that people say, if they feel engaged in a learning experience, then they tend to absorb more of the content that's available to them. And they asked people, what is it that engages them? They looked at the frequency of learning opportunities, and it was around that mark of 36% of people said that they, you know, felt engaged by getting lots of opportunities to learn something new. So people enjoy having a regular opportunity to learn something new in your organisation. Slightly above that was breadth. And what we mean by that is that people are looking to learn not only specific to their current circumstance or their current role, but they're looking to learn more about the business, even if it currently doesn't apply to them. So they're looking to learn a multitude of different things. They want to absorb different skills, and they want to cultivate those skills, even if it means that it might lead them out of their current role, even if it means it might lead them out of your employ. It's really important that we teach them a multitude of different things. But the way above that is the quality of the learning experience. And what I guess the message here is far more that when we're talking about creating powerful learning experiences, what I'm on about today is not creating lots and lots of them and making amazing amounts of work for you all. What I'm talking about is improving the quality of the ones that do exist in your organisation. So hugely important that we focus on quality over quantity. I would contend to you, though, that I think that we have a terrible habit of focusing on quantity. We fill our notice boards and our email inboxes with messages about, seminars and workshops and online courses that people can access themselves to. But the truth is, if the quality of those learning experiences offered is no good, then people start to take a negative view of learning in itself, which, as we know, is an incredibly detrimental thing for your organisation. So we want to make sure we're focusing today on quality, not quantity. And what I'm going to do today is basically just work my way through 10, what I believe are the 10 most important and simple things that you can do straight away to try and try, I guess, to improve the quality of those learning experiences. And the first one here is activity first. This comes from a martial arts perspective. It was a fantastic program that, as an educator, I've run in schools a lot, and it's a program called Rock and Water. And what Rock and Water does is it's a boys' education program, and it's designed to target those boys that are a bit rambunctious, a bit short of fuse, a bit aggressive, and sometimes even a bit violent, and to try and help them move forward. I had some fantastic, it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, doesn't it, to take aggressive students and teach them how to punch and kick more effectively. But what it really teaches them is how to make smart and strong decisions when they're under pressure. And one of the things I took out of the training was not just the content of it, but it had this really strong imperative that activity first, which means that when the students arrived at a Rock and Water lesson that I was running, I was never, ever to begin the lesson with instruction. it was always had to be a game, or it always had to be a physical act, a physical practice of something that they'd learned in a previous lesson, because it was always about priming people. Priming is an incredibly important thing for us to do in the learning environment, because we're setting people up at the very beginning of a learning experience for the kinds of behaviours and the kinds of engagement that they will be required or asked to demonstrate. And what we do in Rock and Water is we're encouraging the young people who are working with us that this is a lesson about movement. This is a lesson where we want you on your feet. This is a lesson where we will practice things. This is a lesson where you will not be passive. And far too many of our learning experiences begin with people being passive. So even today, we're about 10 minutes into our webinar, but what I do want to do while we're on activity number 1, what I do want to do is make sure that you see your opportunity to get involved today. So today could be a passive experience. If you compel me to do so, then I have every possibility of being able to talk for, you know, maybe 50 or 60 minutes, and I hope that I'm going to give you some amazing content. I'm going to go like the clappers. I'm going to rattle through these 10 and really hope you get there. But I think you should challenge me, and I think you should challenge me by asking questions. So I want you to know that you've got that chat or question section that you can have available to you to be able to interact today. And I also want you to know that you can, you know, old classroom style, put your hand up. If you have a look at your control panel, you'll be able to see that there's a little hand there. And if you do put that hand up, it actually gives me the chance to unmute you, and you can make a real contribution to today. So I want you to know very explicitly that that's available to you. You're in charge today. And if there's a part of this, a part of one of these magic 10 that I'm talking about today to help you with your quality of learning experiences, that you go, I want to ask you, yes, but what about that? Then let's ask that question today and really get yourself involved. Priming's amazing. We prime people with activity. That's about priming people to physically interact differently. I'm thinking about doing it tomorrow. I've got I'm running a full day workshop for teachers tomorrow, and one of the things that I'm going to do, I'm going to experiment with the learning environment, which is something that I want you to do. I want you to do as well. One of the things I'm going to do tomorrow is I'm not going to start the presentation from the front of the room. So I'm going to be the first person that arrives at the room. I'm going to set up roughly in the middle of the room in one of the participants' places. When everybody sits down and everybody's ready to start the day, I'm going to take my place in the middle of the room, and I'm going to start to speak to the first slide that's on the screen. And the message that I'm trying to send, and I've done this a couple of times before now, so I've got a rough idea of how it'll go. It'll freak people out, particularly the people on the table that I'm sitting at, because it's not a learning environment that they're used to. But what I'm priming them for is that we are going to work through the slides on the screen, not me. I want a far higher level of collaboration in the workshop and a far higher level of conversation in the workshop tomorrow than might be their expectation, the expectation of the participants as they arrive. So hugely important for me to make sure that I present tomorrow from a different location, because I'm going to prime them that we are working on what's on the screen, not that I am. The second one that I want you to be really aware of, and this is something that when we ask for feedback that's all about our performance, you know, even that notion of the word performance gives the impression that we're there to entertain in some way, and that's not what you're doing when you're in an educative environment. So I want you to avoid this concept of edutainment, that I'm there to try and train you and to teach you something, but somehow I have to be an awesome performer for you to get some good feedback from you. I think there's a difference between a great educator and a great performer. And they don't have to be the same thing. So you see, what's interesting about the stage is that it is built for entertainment. It is built for one person up there with an incredible skill set that we can marvel at, because we kind of believe that we could never attain that level. And for most of us, that's not the reason that we train. We don't stand in front of people because I want to show off. We stand in front of them because we would like to change something in the participants. And the stage, the idea of putting ourselves on the stage at the front of the room and training only from that platform, is really counterintuitive to some of the outcomes that you might really want in a learning environment. And there I'm talking about things like the stage is no good for trying to engender change. It's no good for growth. It's no good for planning. It's no good for decision making. Not many of us have ever gone and made life-changing decisions at an AC/DC or a Beyonce concert. It's no good for collaboration. People don't work together when they're when there's someone on the stage. The best they can manage is catch someone who's stage diving or start a Mexican wave. That's basically the extent of collaboration that people can manage, and it's no good for problem solving. So it's purely the context of the sage on the stage is purely to make sure that we to entertain. And that's why we find that there are limitations when we get people in to only do a speech or only do a keynote. We can think that they're fantastic, but then sometimes we reflect that 2-3 weeks later, you know what, they were fantastic, but not much has changed since they spoke to us. We haven't done any of the things that they said. And it's because we set up the environment for entertainment and not for education. So I want you to be really careful about that. And what that's about is resisting tradition. Now, I want you, when I mentioned a moment ago that I'm going to present tomorrow from the middle of the room, I want you to use your intuition about that. I want you to, follow your gut a little bit about what will get you the outcome that you're looking for in your participants. So, when I refer to intuition, what I mean, I guess, is that I'm looking for you to challenge convention and tradition. And I want you to say, okay, there might be some traditions here and defaults that I'm deferring to in the learning environment. And you know what? I'm going to run a scientific experiment here. I'm going to set my hypothesis that people will learn more. I've set one. I think my people will engage differently tomorrow if I present from the middle of the room. And then you do what so good scientists do, is they seek to both disprove or prove that hypothesis. So what I want you to do is to trust your intuition. If you feel like there's something you can change, particularly through that lens of taking it away from being a staged event, then I want you to know that, yeah, it's valid. Give it a go. Give it a try. Some of the best, we call in schools, we call it pedagogy, which is the art of, I guess the science of teaching combined with the art of learning. Some of my best pedagogy that I've developed has been stuff that, you know what, I'm just going to try this and see what happens. So I want you to know that you're far more scientist than you are artist. You're far more scientist than you are performer when you're in the learning environment. Avoid that idea of being there for edutainment. It doesn't matter. The next, I guess, had a bit of fun with my headline here. I think Vanilla Ice was onto something when he wanted us to stop, collaborate, and listen. No, I'm not going to sing it for you. And one of what I think he was on about there, or it's probably completely not what he was on about, but how it resonates for me, and it resonates for me through a TED talk that I saw not long ago, but also through an approach to getting people to collaborate, getting people to cooperate that I used when I was a school principal. The TED talk that I saw is one that I want to encourage you to go and have a look at. It's one by a fabulous presenter called Jane McGonigal, and she does a talk where she talks about something called massive multiplayer thumb wrestling. And what she did, there's another picture that she uses where she's got possibly about 25 people trying to thumb wrestle at once, which doesn't work very well. Most of us are used to the idea of thumb wrestling one-on-one, but then she wanted to look at what's the best number for getting thumb wrestling to work in a massive multiplayer kind of way. And what she discovered through a series of experiments was that the right number's 4. And I found this profoundly interesting as an educator because I've looked deeply into cooperative learning, even founded a school on the whole notion of cooperative learning. And it was, I guess, on the back of work by a really clever fellow called Spencer Kagan. Now, if you want to look up his stuff in schools, it's Kagan. And what Kagan said was that the optimum number for learning and working together is definitely 4. So I thought, there's a little bit of correlation here. But what Kagan said was, he gave us a warning about the number 4. He said, don't think that because you put people in groups of 4 that they're going to do magical things. If they know each other really well, that helps, because if they have a positive relationship, and there's kind of some unwritten rules of engagement, and people tend to be a bit more polite and try to include each other. If they don't know each other, so I've got that challenge tomorrow. I've got basically a public event tomorrow with about 50 people coming along, and in that challenge, if I get them together in groups of 4 and ask them to solve a problem together, the human dynamic will come over the top of the behaviours that I'm looking for. What I mean is that in the group of 4, there'll be one who we might refer to as the hog, who will go, great, it's group work, it's my time to shine. And 2, there'll be a log who will go, great, it's group work, it's my time to do basically bugger all. And so that's counterintuitive, because then there's 2 people left in the middle who are mildly annoyed with both the hog and the log. If we provide a structure for the way that we want people to work, then what happens is that we eliminate that whole hog and log concept, and we actually get a cog, which means we get 4 cogs who are actually working together to get something done. When we are talking about a great cooperative learning structure, what we're looking for is 4 things. We're looking for interdependence, which means they have to need each other to finish the task. We're looking for individual accountability. We're looking for equal participation, and we're looking for simultaneous interaction. So 4 components that should sit within it. I use a couple of cooperative learning structures very regularly. One's called Talking Chips. I use that one quite a lot, where I ask the 4 people in a group to take 3 chips each to discuss a particular concept. They don't have to take turns, but every time you utter a sentence, you have to throw one of your chips into the middle. And once you're out of chips, you shut up. And you have to wait for the other people to get rid of their chips. Incredibly important that we do that, and that people stick to those rules. It actually gets them engaging at a much higher level. And then you can take your chips back out and you can get going again. And then the other one is I do one called All Right, where I get one person to take a piece of paper. I'll give them something to discuss. They, again, don't need to take turns. They can talk about it, but the person with the piece of paper has to stay quiet. And when an important concept is raised in solving this problem that the group's working on, they write that sentence down and they pass it on to the next person. Just noticing here, Bill, thank you so much for letting me know those 4 components of a great cooperative learning structure. I'll just go over those quickly because Bill is reminding me that I've moved too quickly. It's interdependence, which means that we need each other to finish the activity. So you notice that in Talking Chips, I kind of can't finish the activity until everyone's spent their chips. It's individual accountability, which means I have to step up. I can't log out the back. Equal participation. So we all have 3 chips in that situation. Okay, so it's not that one person gets to hog, and then simultaneous interaction, which means we're kind of not waiting for our turn to come off the bench. We're saying, we're in all the time. Turn taking and wait time is a wonderful killer of engagement. So we want to be careful about creating a learning environment where people sit and wait for their turn regularly. We want people off the bench being players in the activity. Moving on. Number 4, manipulate the context. I find it such a frustration when I walk into any sort of training or workshop, and I sometimes find, because I'm a bit of a educative nerd, and I'm trying to work out why a person has done a certain thing, or sometimes to my own horrible distraction, I'm not actually listening to what they're talking about. I'm more focused on how they're talking about it or why the room's set up a particular way. So what I want you to do is to think about how you set up your room and to manipulate that context. You can't control whether somebody arrives in your room and they've had breakfast. You can't control whether they've had a fight with their partner that morning. You can't control whether they've had no sleep because they've got a baby in the house, or that the neighbours have had a big party. All completely out of your control. But the one thing that is within your control is the context that you're working in. So what I want you to do is to start to think about how you want that context set up. And like I said, it drives me absolutely bonkers that sometimes I'll arrive and the person who's delivering the training of that day is sort of using a methodology that doesn't suit the room, functions not matching form. So if your intention, for instance, is to deliver while you're in the learning environment, then sure, put people in, say, maybe a horseshoe shape, because in that environment you can make eye contact with everybody really easily, and most of the attention is going to be at the presenter on the open end of the horseshoe. So if you're looking to make speeches, if you're looking to have people refer to handouts or to be able to see slides, the horseshoe context can work quite well. If you are looking to entertain, if you are looking to be Beyonce or AC/DC, then you might set people up in rows so that they are front-facing and that they are entertained. The only bit of warning that I give you about that, this goes back to our point 2 about edutainment. The only bit of warning I give you is that if you are going to entertain, you better be good. you better be incredibly good at entertaining. And for most of us, you know, there's a reason that most people say public speaking is above death as a fear for them. Most of us aren't that great at it. And the good news is you don't have to be. But don't set the room up as though you are going to entertain people. Don't prime them for thinking that this is all about how good they are as a presenter if you're if it's not your intention. But then for me, collaboration, which for me I have a bent towards. I would like to have people collaborate to problem solve, to do some higher order thinking when they're together. So for me, that means I'm going to set up the room that way. And it amazes me how often I do walk into a training environment and somebody says they're going to get people to have lots of conversation today. We're going to have, we're really going to work through contextual issues, and the room's set up in rows. I'm thinking, how does that help people at all to be able to collaborate? And you know what, even as I go back to my days of being a teacher and working even with some early childhood students, I can get a whole class of year ones to completely change the context of a classroom in 90 seconds. You know, to get the function, to get the form that I want for the function of the classroom that I'm going to use it for. You know, go to the effort. Go to the effort. Make sure that if you land in an environment where the training, the furniture is in the wrong place, move it. Don't put up with it. Even get your participants to move it and tell them why they're doing it. Hugely important. But also, if you get the opportunity to prepare for that, really think carefully. Really think carefully. If you've got a training room in your organisation, you're going to run some training, then what I want you to do is to think really carefully about how you're going to have it set out, and ask yourself that question: is this form that I'm setting up here going to match the function of the behaviours that I'm looking to happen in that environment? It's a really important question to ask ourselves. On to number 5. Oh, I love this. Ask better questions. When we're in tell mode, when we make the educative experience all about what we've got to say, we're doing it for a reason. We're doing it because it's easy to assess. It's easy to assess. All we need to say is, did I get through all the slides? And we would say yes. Well, then I did my job as a presenter. I told them. I delivered them everything that I needed to deliver. Of course, there's absolutely no compulsion or guarantee that anything's going to change as a result. A really clever, one of my edu heroes would be a fellow called Professor Shigata Mitra. And what Mitra did was he is famous for not only his TED Talks, but for his hole in the wall experiment. What he did was he tried to his hypothesis as an educator was that we don't need teachers. Sorry, I need to reframe that. We do need teachers. And he found a rather uncomfortable truth out, and that is that sometimes we don't. Because what he did was he went and took some computers and installed them in the wall in an Indian slum, in one of the slums of India. And he left them there. They were all programmed to operate only in English, and there were no English speakers in these small villages. So we left them there. The kids, obviously, were the first who were attracted to the technology. And what he found was that, he left them there for a month and then came back and asked the students, did you use the computers? And they said, yes, we really liked them. And he said, did you learn anything? And they said, no. And then one of them piped up, well, apart from the whole process of photosynthesis, we didn't learn anything. And Shigata Mitra was gobsmacked. And he was actually in Australia, Mitra, just a few weeks ago, speaking at a conference in Perth, and I was fascinated by one of the reports that came out of it, because what he was very critical of the environment that we set up in education in Australia, both for our young people and also for our adults, where everything is about tell them something and then test their ability to remember what we told them. And he was actually throwing some big rocks at our habits of standardising our testing of our young people, and even the way we do high school and university exams, because all people do is regurgitate. He says what we're not doing is asking big questions, and one of those big questions was, instead of asking kids to conjugate verbs, we should be asking them questions like, why do people cry? And you get some fascinating thinking that happens when you ask questions like that. Not only to the very young people, if you've got a kid at home, please go home and ask them why they think people cry. It's just hilarious, some of the answers they come up with, but also so creative. And then even when you ask teenagers or when you ask adults, why do you think people cry? The thinking that goes on is of a much higher level. And one of the reasons for it is it's just a great question. It's just a terrific question to ask people. Ask them high-level questions to which there isn't necessarily an answer that we can mark right or wrong. And when we get people thinking at that really high level, number one, what that does is that it leads us to behaviour change. So what I mean by that is that, no behaviour changes randomly. So none of us, for instance, woke up this morning on a diet. It doesn't just happen to you where you go, hang on, what happened there? How did I end up eating half a grapefruit for breakfast? That was awful. It doesn't happen like that. You have to think about it first. So you get people thinking at a higher level, which means there's a better chance of transference to a behavioural shift. And the other thing is that when you get people thinking at a higher level, it can change everything. When people really start to think, and when they do it collectively, and when they really tackle big, open-ended, ethereal issues, it can be in your organisation. So you're asking people, why do you think that our profit margin is such? They actually think at a much higher level than just actually receiving what the profit margin is at the moment. So making sure that they actually think at a really high level is a great way to engender real positive change and growth. But definitely also the way to foster that is to ask some bigger and better questions. This is a really fascinating thing that I want you to bring in. I always ask myself, okay, before I run any sort of training or learning event, I'm always asking myself, okay, what's my wilf and what's my walt? So I always make it really clear to the people that I'm working with, wilf is what I'm learning for, which means that we need to explain to people the why. What's the reason that I'm learning this today? So what I'm learning for is the wilf part of this. I would contend that in far too often in the learning experiences that we build, they lack power because we haven't explained the why. The why goes directly to the motivation that people have for learning things. If people know why they're doing something, they're more likely to engage with the what and the how. And it also goes to the relevance of it. Sometimes I do catch myself when I'm thinking about a topic or even just a little segment of a day's training that I might be going to run, and then I ask myself, what's the wilf here? What am I learning for? And if I can't actually come up with a decent answer, then that part of the content needs to go. If there's not a good reason to learn it, if people can't see the direct relevance, and if I can't explain it, then it's actually not important. It needs to go. We need to value people's time and effort more respectfully than that. So make sure that there's a really good wilf, a really good understanding of what I'm learning for, what's the relevance, and then motivate me to get going with it. And then there's the walt, which means that we should be able, at any time that we're in a learning environment, we should be able to walk up to people and say, what are you learning to do? And they should be able to say, we are learning to, which means that we've got to focus not just on we're sitting here and receiving some information and taking some notes because I had to be here. It means that what we're saying is that that people are very clear on what they're learning to do. There's a skill component here. There's a capability component here. It's not just the low level of just receiving knowledge. And so we should be able to, in any great learning, any powerful learning experience, walk up to people and say, what are you learning to do? And they should be able to tell you what their walt is. So it's a little peek behind the curtain of something that we do. We are learning to do, I guess, in Australian education environments, is we're learning to provide for people the learning intention. And so you'll notice that today my learning intention is about how you build, what makes a powerful learning experience. So that's the topic we're going to cover today. In terms of the walt, what I'm hoping for you guys is that you will learn how to manipulate the context to get a better learning environment. You'll know what wilf and walt means, and you'll know how to prime people to engage with their bodies as well as their minds. So it's important that there's a learning intention and that some success criteria are made explicit. We don't need to keep them to ourselves. We can make sure that people know about it. I often go to the trouble of even writing it up on a whiteboard so that people know what the relevance is of what they're spending their time on with me. Okay. The next one, oh, this is something that we forget so often. I use this picture because I wonder if this is the same for you. Whenever I'm trying to, upload or download something, whenever I'm trying to, watch a video, we get something like this progress bar. And I find it's not particularly interesting. It's just a little blue line that gets longer and longer and longer. Yet there's something about this that I can't look away from. Everything that's on my screen I can walk away from. I've got no problem with that, except this slowly growing blue line. And I've thought hard about why is that? Why is it that I can't walk away from this blue line? And I think what it is that I really like progress. I really like knowing and seeing that I'm getting somewhere. And I want us to take that thinking into account when we're building a learning experience. So I think that one of the things we don't do often is show people when they have done something, when they finish something, when an objective has been done. I often use my PowerPoint slides. So sometimes what I'll do is have a little, even a bar in the bottom corner that shows people how far through the workshop we are. Even sometimes I'll put a little numerical one in there so they can see that we're 17% of the way through the workshop, and people take comfort from that. And I think that what it does is it lets people know that they're getting somewhere. People feel like they're winning when they can see that little blue bar, or when they can see the scoreboard. They feel like, oh, well, I'm getting somewhere. This is really great. And they also know how long they're going to need to strap in their energy for, which is important. So one, I guess, in terms of time and in terms of content covered, I think it's important that people know what the progress of that is. When I get to my workshop tomorrow, there are 4 key areas that we're going to work through, and that's my first slide for tomorrow. The first slide's not going to be a wonderful heading tomorrow. They're going to see the 4 key areas that we're going to work through tomorrow, because I need them to know when we transition from one to the other, so they know how much more energy they need to provide me with. It also gives me a chance to celebrate milestones and breakthroughs. So when you get things that get done, when you solve big problems and you provide a bit of impetus through some good content, and then people go, oh, I have just been thinking that this applies to our area of business so heavily because of this, and on Monday I'm going to do this completely differently. It's great to go and I often keep a little breakthrough tally. So I'll keep a little corner of a whiteboard reserved for breakthroughs, and to put them up there is a great way for people to go, oh, okay, I might look for a breakthrough as well. So really important that you do that. Show people their progress as they're working through your learning environment. Very, very important stuff. The next one this is about you. So much of what I'm telling you today is about them. It's about the educator. A really good leader of the learning environment is someone who reflects on who they are as a leader. And I want you to think about firmness. I want you to think about how firm, and it could be mainly because the best teachers that you probably had when you were at school were both firm and fair. You probably remember the ones who were ridiculously firm and strict. They probably left some mental scars upon you in some ways. And you can probably struggle a little bit to remember the fair ones, because the ones who are overly fair and not firm are the ones who you were kind of busy walking all over when you were at school. So I don't want you to be either of those. What I really want you to be is both. I want you to be firm and fair. Firmness is all about boundaries and limits and expectations. So it's about making clear, for instance, one of the things I always make clear about at the start of any learning environment that I run is that it is the way that people can use technology. I make it really clear what my expectations are around the use of phones and tablets and laptops. So I tell people, get them out. If you're going to use them, get them out, put them on your table. And I'm happy to believe that you're taking notes, or that you're tweeting about how fantastic the learning experience is. I'm absolutely cool with that. It must be on silent, and I don't want to see you leave the room with a phone stuck to your ear because you decided that a call is more important than what we're doing today. So I make that boundary around the use of technology really clear. And I ask, is there anybody who's got a problem with that? And occasionally you do get someone who explain it to me. Okay, I might give you a chop out if your wife is 39 and a bit weeks pregnant, and if 3 calls, I'm going to take the call. Fair enough, not a problem with that at all. And what that is, making that consideration, is about bringing in the fairness. So fairness is about support, and it's about encouragement, and it's about nurturing. People like to feel looked after in a learning environment, because when we combine that support, encouragement, and nurturing, it sort of accumulates into a feeling of safety. And what we know is that feeling of safety is one of those positive affects that people experience that absolutely enhances how much they're going to transfer from your content into their short and hopefully in the end long-term memory. So we want to differentiate. We often differentiate in terms of content. So if the content's too hard for someone, we'll give them a bit of extra time at the morning tea break to go over it with them. But we don't often do it in terms of people and in terms of understanding where people are at. And when we don't do that, we do sometimes get that hint of humiliation and shame coming in that we know can be a massive anchor on how people actually really engage. I always like to think, when I go back now to thinking about how people, what we want people to do, or what we want people to, leave with. What's the product we want people to leave with? I love this thinking frame, and I guess for me, it goes back to the reason I show the menu thing is that the KTFD is about knowledge, about what at the end of any experience, people should be able to articulate for you what they know, what they think, what they feel, and what they decide. And I think decisions are so tricky when we overburden people with content. I don't know about you, I'm much more comfortable about the food that's coming to me at a wedding when it's going to be either chicken or beef. I don't like lots of choice. When I'm staring over a menu that has 40 different main courses for me to choose from, that's a recipe for hunger. It's because I find it very hard to make a decision. So we want to make it easy for people to make decisions. Knowledge, I guess, to go back to the K, knowledge is something that you've committed as a truth. So it's something that you've gone, actually, I've learned something here that I am now committing to being something that I will do from now on. So you might today go, okay, the bit of knowledge that I'm taking away with me is that function matches form. And I will. I've made a decision to think about the context before I start a learning experience in the future. T is something that you think, so it might be it's a bit less formed, a bit less concrete than knowledge. So I'm thinking that this has something to do with why we've been getting this level of satisfaction or retention or turnover from our people, but I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with it yet. I'm thinking about it. And that's okay. A lot of concepts that you might present are things that you might have thought about deeply, but they might be new to other people. So it does take them time to be able to process them. F, you have to understand that while I can't get up and say that we're going to have an attempt to produce positive affect. And when you do that, you might, for instance, decide that, enjoyment or laughter is an affect that you would like people to experience, and you tell a joke to get that. Doesn't mean the joke's going to fly. It could be an absolute stinker, and you might even offend someone with one of those jokes. So what happens is that their feelings are not what you intended, because the truth is that when it comes to the feelings that people experience in a learning environment, we have no imposter over them. We just can't. We do the best we can, but the feelings belong to that person, and we have to pay them due credence. If they hate what we've done that day, they just do. Learn your lesson and move on. And then D, like I said, is the word decide. Even the etymology behind the word decide is same as the etymology behind horrible words like homicide and genocide and suicide. And when we have that side suffix on a word, it's about killing off. When we decide, we kill off choice. So we say that we are drawing a line without shame. I think too often we don't make decisions because it would mean that we somehow are saying that in the past we've done bad things. It's not that. You're just doing the best you can with what you've got at the time. And when you've got something new, of course you should do it differently. So the decision to step over a line and to do things completely differently in the future is something that I really love to try and generate in my learning experiences for people. Very big on trying to move people through knowledge, thinking, and feeling and towards a really high quality decision as they move in a learning environment. All right, last of all, the one thing that I guess this is an overarching theme, it leads me into a little bit about what the webinar will be about in August, is this whole concept of unlearning. While I have presented to you 9 things that I hope you have added to your toolkit today, I think the truth is that to make room to use those things effectively, we need to bust some myths and assumptions, and we need to get rid of some practices. We need to clear the decks so that you actually can make room for these new things. So one of the things that I've tried to emphasize for you today is that you can unlearn the notion that when you run a learning experience that you need to be at the front of the room with a lapel mic on. You don't have to. I want to let you know that you are allowed to run learning experiences without a beautifully manufactured and a slide deck that you've had to go and pay for somebody else to put together for you. You don't have to. You don't have to. You don't have to run a learning environment where people have wonderful notes at the end of it. In fact, I don't allow people in my learning environments to have a notepad, because most of my notepads have ended up on the floor of my car in some form or another. I take a few postcards with me, and I ask people to make some key decisions on those postcards, to take that postcard away and to pin it up somewhere where they'll get a reminder. You don't need to have a notepad on your table, but for some reason the Hilton has convinced us that you need 8 pages and a Hilton branded pen for you to be able to learn effectively, and it's not the case. So I want you first, while I do want you to add those things to your toolkit, have them available, hugely important to me that you start to unlearn those things that we've built as assumptions, and you started building them the first time you landed in school. You started looking around at what a learning environment was, and you made the, sort of made the assumption, okay, this is what it is, and it doesn't need to be the case. So I want you to look for ways to bust myths and to shatter those assumptions about what learning needs to look like, and see if we can find some more powerful ways to get the job done. So, look, guys, that brings me to the end of today. I do want to encourage you that I can't sit here and say that sometimes when you throw a heap of content at people that they are going to think about it for a little while, and it's going to take them a moment to absorb it all. I can't say that to you and then not give you the chance to absorb further, I think. So what I've made available to you today is, you can see a download section, a handout section, sorry, in your control panel, and you can download the slide deck from today, so that you can have that as a reference and a resource moving forward. Really want you to know that I value your time enough to have that available to you. And if you've been piqued by today, I've gone flat out today to try and make sure that you I guess get the gist of it. But I really want you to know that there's more we can do if you would like to be able to benefit further from this. So what we do is we provide workshops to show people how to do learning better. We do deliver keynotes. We entertain a little bit and try to pique the interest in organisations about working more creatively and creating a learning culture around your organisation. We know that learning cultures outperform those where people are not learning by about 202%. So this goes directly to performance, and we need to ignite an interest in that in your organisation. We coach and we train, and we do long-term partnerships as well. So we actually work with organisations that might have a lot of content to deliver, and they're thinking about how can we have our people absorb that and understand that, and to be able to problem solve with that at a new level, rather than sort of delivering a whole series of kind of boring PowerPoint-laden presentations. So if that interests you, then feel free to use that question box or that chat box today to be able to just let me know that you'd like, give me a call. You might just write in there, or you might just write one of those 5 points there that you think might be useful to you. And I'm really happy to have a chat with you about how we can be of benefit to you. Next month, I'm going to expand the tagline here is why the ways we learn are wrong, and what we need to do about it. So we're going to start to go back into what are the things that we're doing as habit, and we're going to bust those myths, and we're going to shatter those assumptions together. And then we're going to start to look at how we would rebuild, how we would fill that void of practices that aren't serving us with some more of the practices that certainly are. And so this one will be really for people who are leading learning and development, who are leading HR, and people who are in charge of the learning experiences in your organisation. Really want you to think about registering for that one. And look, if we can be of benefit to you in any way, then please reach out. You got my personal details there if you need to get in touch with me about anything after today, and also the Real Learner stuff there, which will tell you a little bit more in detail about what we do in organisations. And if that's of interest to you, then by all means, drop us a line. I'm going to let you go, guys. Thank you so much for being involved today. Thank you to everyone that's putting a couple of little comments and thanks in there as well. I personally appreciate it. Thank you very much, Amy and Bill, and also Jonathan. Really appreciate it. Have a good one, guys, and I'm going to see you all in August. Bye-bye.